Welcome to the air emissions panel of this GREEN4SEA virtual forum. In this panel, we would like to discuss about the ongoing developments in the IMO and of course in other places of the world, such as the EU. Air quality is a key concern as it, let's say, is credited with approximately 400,000 premature deaths per year worldwide. Is considered, let's say, a silent killer. So according to scientific studies, ships generate SOx, NOx, particulate matters, and CO2 as a result of the fuel used. And there's a number of ongoing regulations trying to regulate what is going on. Now, what we have in the agenda, besides the EEDI, we have the EEXI and the CII as the latest chapter of this, let's say, compliance book. In order to have this discussion today, we have gathered a panel of experts. Let me introduce them to you. We have Harilaos Psaraftis, who is professor of the Department of Technology, Management and Economics at Technical University of Denmark. We have Edmund Hughes, who is the director of Green Marine Associates, previously with the IMO. Panos Hariadis, who is the technical director of the Atlantic Bulk Carriers. John Kokarakis, who is the vice president, Technology and Business Development for the Hellenic, Black Sea and Middle East zone of Bureau Veritas. And last but not least, Panos Koukoutis. Panos is the technical director of Sea Traders, who is one of the prominent dry bulk operators in the market. So we would like to discuss, as I said, as the first order of business is out of the agenda, we would like to discuss what are the industry's key challenges with regard to their emissions, what should we expect with respect to a possible MBM, what are the implications to the market out of these latest EEXI and CII, and among other things, we will start this discussion by having a set of presentations. I would like to ask Harilaos Psaraftis to start with his presentation by sharing his screen.
Thank you. So this is the title of my presentation, Reducing Greenhouse Gases Emissions from Ships. Are we on the right track? And in order to save time, the short answer is not yet. So, but I can continue for 7.5 minutes. Let me see. So I guess everybody knows about the initial IMO strategy, where the central, it has some very ambitious goals. The central ambition is to reduce annual greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% by 2050 versus 2008 levels. And there is this intermediate target of 2030 to reduce annual CO2 emissions per transport work by at least 40%, and pursue an effort to reduce 70% by 2050. And there is a long list of candidate measures, which are kind of split into 3 tiers: the short term, medium term, and long term. And I put on the right hand side here some sample measures like goal-based versus prescriptive for the short term, market-based measures for the medium term, and alternative fuels for the long term. And the focus right now is the discussion on short-term measures. So it has been decided to converge to 2 approaches. One is the technical approach, which is this EEXI, as Apostolos said before, which has been promoted by Japan and Norway. And then there was an operational approach, which was mainly promoted by Denmark, France, and Germany. The CII, there has been a big delay, or I calculated of the order of 7 to 8 months due to the pandemic. And at the last MEPC, these 2 approaches has been decided to be combined into this EEXI/SEMP/CII measure. This is up for adoption at the next MEPC, and there's going to be an intersessional meeting just before that. There has been a correspondence group to finalize the details. I was a member of the correspondence group just to follow what was going on. The correspondence group has finished the work. However, there are some details that are still open, and at the same time, a consortium led by UNCTAD is tasked to provide a comprehensive impact assessment as part of the package. And this approach has been criticized by some environmental groups as lacking ambition, but we'll see. So this is the main whole of the IMO process. And of the IMO and the process. If you look at this room very carefully, you will see an elephant. So what is the elephant here? The elephant in the room is the EU, which is the intent of the European Commission, of the President, to include the shipping into the EU ETS. ETS for emissions trading system. She has said that ever since she took office, and in fact, last September, the European Parliament has voted for including shipping into the EU ETS. What is ETS? ETS is an MBM. It is a market-based measure. If you look at the initial strategy, you will see that market-based measures are kind of indirectly included under the medium-term measures. They say a new innovative emission reduction measures mechanism possibly included MBMs to incentivize the greenhouse gas emission reduction. There is little visible interest in MBMs right now. I mean, I understand there is a proposal by Marshall Islands and Solomon Islands to reopen the discussion and put a levy of $100 per ton of CO2. But I mean, there's little visible interest. We'll see how it goes, however. So we have two processes. On the one hand, the EU is moving full speed with the EU ETS, and the IMO is moving slow speed with a discussion on the short-term measures, this combined measure. Is there any connection between the two processes, or do we know how an EU ETS, because after all, they're dealing about the same thing, reducing greenhouse gases. Do we know how an EU ETS would affect whatever short-term measure is adopted by the IMO? The answer is no, we don't know. And actually, we don't know exactly how the EU ETS is going to work. I mean, whether it's going to be only intra-European trips like aviation, or include trips to and from Europe like the EU MRV, and they're supposed to do an impact assessment to finalize it sometime this year. And all the major shipping associations are opposed to it. The latest news is not very good. This is a picture from the latest greenhouse gas study, and if you see here the trend from 2012 to 2018, it has been upward. So greenhouse gases has been increasing the last few years, even though there should be peaking at some point or decreasing after a point. The biggest promise, in my honest opinion, is the use of alternative low carbon fuels, and there has been a lot of discussion about this and R&D. However, these fuels need to become viable economically in order to be used, because, I mean, let's face it, if fossil fuels are cheaper, people are going to use them. So here comes the possible role of MBMs. A proper MBM, for example, a carbon tax, will be the thing that incentivizes the development of alternative fuels and other energy-saving technologies. I don't think that these fuels are going to happen by themselves. I mean, you need something to incentivize them. We have a project going on at the EU called MBM Sushi for Sustainable Shipping. It's a PhD project, and we examine MBMs here. The funding comes from the Orient Fund, and we have an advisory, an external advisory committee. You can see the members, pretty illustrious members, and we are in the middle of this project. I have produced some papers. And there are some papers that me and my group have written on decarbonization. We are very active in this area, and maybe you know this book, which also Panos has contributed, the Sustainable Shipping. It was written in 2019, but it's still very relevant, I think. So that was it, actually, for me. Maybe I'm ahead of time, and I'm open to any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick comment to what you presented. You said there's an increase, let's say, in the emissions, but I say there's a but that we have to also bear in mind. Trade has been increased as well. Trade has been increased. Just a quick comment. I don't have to disagree with anything.
Yeah. The carbon intensity has gone down, and I think it's fair to say that probably we will meet the 2030 target. But as far as the absolute level, I don't see any light at this point. But that's my personal view.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Let's hear from Edmund. Edmund, if you can share your screen and let us have your presentation, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Apostolos, and good afternoon, everybody. And really is a great pleasure to be with you today and to provide some input and insight into this very important discussion. From my perspective, I'm really going to talk about, I'm going to sort of take a step back, if you like, and talk a bit about IMO 2020 for the very prime reason that I think sometimes we've got to remember that we've got to learn to walk before we can run, and I think IMO 2020 has some significant lessons for us in terms of how we're going to go forward in terms of development of the international regulatory framework to support effective and uniform implementation of the requirements. I'll take a lot of effort, a lot of insight, a lot of detailed work to be done technically by IMO, and it raises, as you go through that process, it raises other questions which then have to be addressed as you go forward. Just to recall, I'm sure I don't need to tell many of this audience about the IMO 2020 rule and the requirement that from the 1st of January 2020, the sulfur limit of fuel oil was reduced to 0.5% sulfur. We already had the 0.1% sulfur limit in the emission control areas designated by IMO, and there are just a couple of provisions in MARPL 6 which allow the continued use of heavy fuel oil, including the use of exhaust gas cleaning system, an equivalent means of achieving compliance. Primarily exhaust gas cleaning systems are those. But it's worth remembering how long this provision had been around for. I mean, it was adopted in 2008 as part of the revision of MARPL 6, and it was subject to a review in 2016. So where the question was about fuel availability. And I think that's a critical question, frankly, going forward when we're talking about alternative fuels, because, you know, we might talk about zero carbon or low carbon fuels, but what we have to remember is that shipping is a global sector, global industry, and that we need to make sure and ensure that there's fuel available for ships wherever they trade globally. And that is a key question. And it comes to the heart of discussion about those alternative fuels, because we have to think about scale of those fuels, but also sustainability of those fuels and where they're going to be coming from. And that is again a key question as part of the discussion going forward, as I say, about alternative fuels. But to go back again, just to see some context of what was discussed in terms of the implementation of that 0.5% sulfur rule. And again, there was a numerous amount of guidance and guidelines developed to help with the implementation. Very importantly, so as I said before, we had uniform implementation globally. I think also the important role the industry played in terms of helping identify risks, how those risks can be mitigated, and providing very, very important comprehensive guidance, both from the ship perspective, but also from the fuel supply industry perspective. And I think that again showed a demonstration of the stakeholders and the collaboration between stakeholders to achieve further understanding and clear mitigation of risks that were presenting themselves. But I think from the IMO, you see, for example, as we went forward, one of the key aspects of shipping regulation is enforcement. And so it was soon recognized that one of the things we needed to consider was a carriage ban of non-compliant fuel oil, because without that, there was a clear loophole potentially in the implementation and of the regulation. And that, frankly, would lead to a credibility question. And ultimately, international rules and regulations are only as good as the credibility they present to the world community. And it was so important that when it came to 0.5 and the sulfur limit, that whatever regulations were presented, whatever regulations were going to be enforced, that they were seen as credible. That is, they achieved the policy objectives that they set out to do, i.e. Control and reducing air pollution from ships. It was a very important part of that equation. This slide shows you when you look at the various ways of compliance with that requirement, the 0.5%, there were several ways, but there were also several issues that needed further consideration, not least from a safety perspective. And this again, once again, demonstrates that the regulatory framework of international regulatory framework from IMO, it's not just about environmental protection. Critically, it's also about the safety of ships. And we've seen recently with the Ever Given incident in the Suez Canal, how the safety of ships is critically important to the successful and effective and efficient operation of ships and for the global community and from world trade, and how it disrupted world trade, such an incident did. So you can see from here that when using compliant fuel, there were safety issues about that fuel in terms of stability, compatibility, the cold flow properties, the ignition quality, and also flashpoint. Flashpoint, of course, is a mandatory requirement under SOLAS, the Safety of Life at Sea Convention. So again, you can see both sides of the issue here, both environmental protection, but also safety considerations, very critical part. And we'll see that again when it comes to the alternative fuels we're going to be dealing with going forward for greenhouse gas emission reduction. You know, we're talking about ammonia, highly corrosive, highly toxic. We're talking about hydrogen, highly explosive. So there are risks there. There's no such thing as zero risk, and we're going to have to manage those risks, and we have to be very clear about those risks and how we're going to mitigate and manage them on board ships if we're going to be using them as fuels. And you can see that because of the issue of safety, that the involvement of the Marine Safety Committee was equally important here in terms of developing the regulatory framework for the implementation of MARPLAN of the 0.5% sulfur limit. I've talked there already about the equivalent approach using exhaust gas cleaning systems, and you can see already there's discussion ongoing about the prohibition of the wash water from these scrubbing systems, and that will carry on again because it identified as a potential risk from ships that will now need further consideration. Using alternative fuels, again, key part of this. We already have the International Gas Fuel Code, IGF code, and it's there. It's already set up for LNG to be used as a fuel, and there are no guidelines, guidance for using methyl alcohol, and that again is an important development. But of course, there will be other fuels as well coming down the line which need consideration and potentially building into that regulatory framework. And then at birth, guidance on onshore power. It's only guidance at the moment. There's no mandatory requirements, but we know that the EU are thinking about, as part of their Green Deal, mandatory onshore power supply for ships up by 2030. So again, this is going to become a bigger area for consideration and needing. But there is already, the Maritime Safety Committee has already got a group looking at guidelines for onshore power supply. So thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention. The whole point of this presentation is really to set the scene a bit, but also to, again, recall the very important fact that international requirements set a global framework for a global sector that is shipping. And it's very important that we consider that going forward when we're talking about reduction of GHG emissions from ships. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edmund. Now let's hear from Panos Koudis. Panos, if you could be sharing your screen and let us have your presentation, please.
Good afternoon. Then we're talking about environmental regulations, and we're talking about emissions. And I will start with this table, which was published in the study of DELF, actually, a study that was ordered by the EU, and having the impact of this measure, actually the environmental impact of the measure. We consider that the most important factor for the adoption of an environmental measure should be the environmental benefit. So the measure must be selected based on their clear and proven environmental impact, and the consequences and financial impact should follow. So a measure should be considered as good if offers substantial environmental benefits with the minimum disturbance and cost. I made this first mentioning actually because it seems that some environmental measures have marginal or ambitious and unknown environmental impact. So we can see that some of the measures that we have already adopted, we're talking about EEDI, EEXI, SEMP, especially technical measures, have marginal, despite the high cost, marginal environmental benefits, while we have operational measures with substantial environmental benefits. Then we have the commercial measures, the market-based measures, which have the ship emissions taxation, the levy on fuel on CO2, mandatory contribution for research and development. It seems that it is fair because those that consume less will improve their competitive advantage. It is not an interference that will push out of the market some ships, will not change dramatically. However, the measure will be still, the operation will dictate the market actually. So you could spend more money, it will be more expensive, but you can pollute paying more money. And of course, the consequences of the economies of countries in a remote location, if we have a high levy, then obviously the economies maybe have a kind of impact. Some products will be more expensive for the market. And this is something that is not, it is obviously that we will have a reaction also from them. Regarding the taxation for funding research and development, this is also quite debatable. There are many concerns on how this money will be used, which technologies will be financed, and also it seems a little bit awkward that ship owners or shipping will finance research and development of technology that later on will be sold back to them. So we'll finance something that will be sold back to them. Two measures now are on the table with a lot of debates. We have the EEXI and the CII, and I will try to be very brief. Regarding the EEXI, there are already initial reactions, especially from the environmentalists. They thought that the measure will have no environmental impact at all. On the other hand, they said that no, yes, they will have a very big environmental impact and will be very easy to apply this measure. Technical improvement is what is required. In reality, actually, the measure will assess the ships with a number, with the EEXI, the same way that we do with the EEDI. Of course, with EEDI, it's quite different because we have the ship in the initial stage of design. EEXI is applied on existing ships, is only one number. A single number probably does not reflect the performance of a ship at all speeds, drafts, and weather conditions. And in certain conditions, a ship may be better than another ship who has a good environmental rating. So it seems that this is also a point on EEXI, because if we consider, for instance, a car that we need at least a few pages of data to evaluate. Think about a complicated machine like the ship that we will try to evaluate with just a number. However, now the environmental rating is already a regulation that will have IMO stamp. Definitely will have an impact on the ships, even commercially, because probably some terminals will request and some charters will request the ships with the best EEXI to be chartered by them. The actions are required from subships only, not all of them. It is anticipated that not compliant ships will achieve the initial EEXI rating by power reduction. Those that will not be able to have power reduction, probably they will try to have some energy saving device. And then also the replacement of the ship is an option. It seems that the ship penalize older, the regulation penalize older ships. However, we should consider that with the revision of EEXI, if we have a ship today which is 12 or 15 years old, in 2023 and in 2026 will be already almost 20 years old and will have just one EEXI revision to comply and probably will be withdrawn at that age. But if we have a younger ship, which is built with EEXI, the previous EEXI, and now we will face the first EEDI in 2023, then in 2026, in a very early age, I mean, very soon, probably in 2030, we'll have the uncertainty to face quite difficult EEXI. So the regulations, of course, consider that it is only responsibility of the owner to pay the cost for the emission reduction. There is a commercial impact. There is no impact on charter rate because some ships will reduce the speed because of the reduction of the power, but some other will increase the speed to cover the demands. New building, of course, will have will be on demand, and the environmental results are marginal. While CII, which is a little bit confusing because the rating A, B, C, and D, we assume that has to do with the quality of the efficiency of the ship. Actually, limiting emissions is considering that it is limiting consumption. So if we consider CIIs of previous year, we will see that even sister ships could have completely different CIIs because of their operation. So even a very good ship could be rated as E, a very old ship and environmental not so competent will have a rating of A. Thing is that with a mandatory application, so having the CII in MARPOL, will have no option that charters start considering the way to comply with this regulation. So despite the difficulties and despite the complication of the measure, there are indisputable environmental benefits. The efficient ships have an advantage. No ship's modification is mandatory. No ship will become obsolete. Charters are involved in part of the cost. Commercial impacts, yes, it will be a commercial impact for the remote locations because ships will be forced to reduce their speed because they have limited fuel. But this, at least for the owners, will have also a benefit because we're expecting that will increase the demand. And usually this lead to higher charter rates, which is not something that everybody will have in mind. So I go back to the technical measures and to the study of Delft University for EU. We can see the limits. Yes.
Can you please, let's say, conclude because we are out of time with your presentation? Okay,
I have only to say that here we have the table where we see that we are, even if we replace 52% of the ships, we will have only a 14% improvement. And actually, in order to have as a measure the renewal of the fleet, we are expecting to have carbon-free fuels, technical solutions, emission-free energy, and then new design concepts. Thank you, and of course we can discuss also that.
Okay, thank you very much, Panos. Let's hear from John Kokarakis. John, if you could be kind enough to share your screen and let us have your presentation, please.
The most critical air pollutant is carbon dioxide. IMO technical measures is the EEXI for existing ships. Required and attained. Required EEXI is in general identical to EEDI phase 2. Required EEXI is given by this simplified equation. It looks familiar. Same equation like the attained EEDI. Attained EEXI must be lower than the required EEXI. The most powerful way to comply with EEXI is to reduce the MCR of the engine through control software or mechanical stopper. More demanding changes are the change of fuel or hull optimization. Engine tuning and derating or use of ESD have milder impact on the EEXI reduction. It is important that the vessel has a properly determined power speed curve at scuddling draft. In general, utilization of energy-saving devices does not have significant impact on EEXI reduction unless more exotic ESD are installed, like, for example, gate rudders or contra-rotating propellers. The impact of EEXI is less than 1% carbon dioxide reduction. Today, ships operate close to 50% of MCR. The most significant impact is felt on the turbine-driven LNGs. Steam turbine efficiency is dramatically reduced as MCR is reduced. Strong reduction in speed results in surplus boil-off gas and steam dumping. Associated carbon dioxide emitted is not counted. Operational measure is the mandate of Carbon Intensity Index, CII, CO2 emissions per transport work. Most prominent CII metrics are the AER, Annual Efficiency Ratio, and the EEOI, Energy Efficiency Operational Index. In AER, mandated by IMO DCS, deadweight is used for capacity. In EEOI, cargo carried is utilized. Given the variability of both, but much more of the EEOI, AER has been chosen as the metric. EEOI, and to a lesser degree, annual efficiency ratios, are influenced by weather and commercial utilization. In the computation of annual efficiency ratio, some voyages are excluded. Idle voyages of prolonged duration, like ships at terminal, a tanker awaiting a berth, voyages in ice or bad weather, shuttle tankers in dynamic position operations. Fuel spent for vessel operations, like for cargo heating, will be excluded, as well as that for freezing or chilling of the reefer containers. For each type of ship, depending on its deadweight or gross tonnage, an exponential equation is determined by linear regression. The IMO corresponding group proposed the ship type dependent annual reduction of CII, or a flat 2% percentage value for all ship types. The first option is more meaningful because it is based on the more realistic EEOI demand-based. Both options assume linear variation, but life is not linear. If you fall from a skyscraper from the top, you die. If you jump from roof to roof, you may survive. Final option will be decided at MEPC 76. Ships will be assigned a ranking label: Major Superior A, Minor Superior B, Moderate C, Minor Inferior D, and Inferior E. Boundaries determined by quantile regression are parallel lines being at constant relative distance. Study of the boundaries reveals that D-rated vessels occupy wider limits than the B-rated ones. The distribution is skewed towards lower ratings. Here you see an example of a B-rated bulk carrier. E rating for 1 year or D rating for 3 consecutive years is to be followed by corrective actions. A critical question is how to improve the carbon intensity indicator. There are draconian measures and lighter ones. Dracon is a very well-known Athenian lawmaker. Draconian measure is, for example, change of fuel to one of lower emission factor. Innovative efficiency devices reducing the carbon dioxide emitted, like waste heat recovery systems, air lubrication systems, wind assisted propulsion systems, better logistics, weather routing, and all of this aiming to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases. Thank you for your attention, and try to do things the right way. If you only have a hammer, do not treat everything as a nail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. And now let's hear from Panos Zachariadis. Panos, if you could share your screen, let us have a presentation.
So a little, first of all, thank you for the invitation, Apostole, and good afternoon, everyone. A brief background, what happened, and we have ended up with EEXI and CII. The last MEPC that had physical presence of the delegates was in May 2019, and the delegates had to choose whether EEXI proposal or the CII proposal will go forward. It was one or the other at that time. Denmark made a presentation about the benefits of EOI and AER in order to support CII. However, the presentation they made was disastrous. It was made by the Technical University of Denmark. I think Harilaos was also involved. It showed that EOI and AER were very random. Now, following the presentation, the majority of IMO members voted in favor of EEXI, of course. But something a little unprecedented happened. The chairman of the meeting said, we need to have maximum consensus in this. Please try to incorporate elements from the CII proposal into the EEXI proposal. To make a long story short, we ended up with both proposals. So EEXI is easy. Instead of applying speed limit to ships, which was a big debate at that time, if you remember, we apply a power limit, which in my opinion is much better than a speed limit, but that's a different discussion. Now, CII to me is deja vu all over again. As Yogi Berra, the famous baseball player in the United States, said, he was also a philosopher. Deja vu all over again. Why I say deja vu? Here is a slide from the 2016 conference of GREEN4SEA. I say that a simple index to categorize the efficiency of ships is attractive, but it is utopia. And from 2017 GREEN4SEA conference, ship energy efficiency indicators are fake news. In that presentation, I made the position that EOI is nothing more than a random number generator. But let's forget what I say. Let's see what the study that Denmark presented at that MEPC says. It says that the average values of an index that varies from 5.9 to 21.3 for the same ship in similar annual voyages makes no sense. Now, this is not an exact quote. They said the same thing a little more diplomatically. But if you want exact quotes, here are some. The range of the annual values reported is too wide to convey any meaningful message regarding energy efficiency. They are talking about EOI and AER. The AER is also inadequate for benchmarking purposes. It appears that the information needed for benchmarking the energy efficiency of ships cannot be condensed in a single indicator. So what's the result of CII? Huge bureaucracy and cost to owners and charterers, a rating system that is irrelevant to real ship efficiency, the ABC. Therefore, we cannot expect any CO2 reductions, huge upsetting of the market, and many other consequences that are too numerous. Perhaps you can discuss them. And all this for nothing. So here I am to present a better indicator to you. I have written about it, but it's the first time that I present it in a presentation. Let's look at the EEDI. EEDI is supposed to measure the efficiency of a ship, but it does so at a rare load condition, maximum draft, in sea conditions that the ship will never encounter in her life. So, as it stands, EEDI says nothing about how a ship will behave in real seas, in waves, or in different drafts. Is there a better index? Well, let's look at the automotive industry. They measure CO2 and they rate the ships based on typical driving cycles. Therefore, the design already incorporates the operational performance of the product in real conditions. And of course, the regulation regulates the manufacturer and not the driver. Now, IMO already has the tool for a better indicator. This factor here is the weather factor. And if the weather factor is not considered as one, as it is in normal EEDI, then the EEDI you get is called EEDI weather. Now, the weather factor is actually a factor that indicates what is the speed loss of a ship from Beaufort 0 to Beaufort 6. So obviously, a ship that doesn't lose much speed from 0 to Beaufort 6 is an efficient ship. And a ship that loses a lot of speed, perhaps it is bathtub shape and not so hydrodynamic, is an inefficient ship. Therefore, EEDI weather incorporates in the design the operational performance of the ship in real sea conditions, albeit at full draft only. So if we introduce EEDI ballast, which means an extra sea trial run at ballast condition, which happens anyways for bulk carriers, then we can have an index as an example for bulk carriers that looks like this. EEDI weather laden times 60% plus EEDI weather ballast times 40%. Why 60 and 40? Because a typical bulk carrier operates most of the time, 60% of the time in laden condition and 40% of the time in ballast condition. And if you want to take it further, you can add to this indicator eco speeds. Have another trial run at sea trials at 40% MCR, and then you can incorporate EEDI slow speed laden and ballast. And that's my proposal, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Panos. I would like to start right away with our discussion. And I would like to start with my first question about the IMO 2020. It seems that we have had, let's say, a seamless transition to this new fuel, and about any problems with NOx Tier 3, because this seems to be, let's say, something like a silent emittent, these NOx emissions. We have these requirements. I would like to remind to our audience for new builds after 2016 in the North American ECA, sorry, and we have these requirements also applicable for the North Sea and Baltic ECA from new builds up after 1st of January of 2021. So I would like to start with Harilaos. Your thoughts on the transition and any lessons to be learned out of this transition to a new fuel, and maybe the NOx Tier 3 issues.
Okay, you're talking about the sulfur cap in 2020.
Yes.
Yeah, I admit I don't know that much. The thing is that the implementation of the cap coincided by a matter of a few months with the pandemic. And you would perhaps, if there were no pandemic, be able to see what the impact of the higher prices of the new fuels would do to, for example, regarding ship speeds and whatever. So people were expecting that because of the significantly higher prices of the new fuels, you would see a slowdown of the fleet. But this didn't happen because of all the prices collapsed after the COVID. And we have recently published a paper that is entitled The Impact of the Sulfur Cap on CO2 Emissions, and we have found that although the decarbonization and desulfurization are two separate things, there is definitely a connection, and you would expect a slight increase in CO2 emissions because of the sulfur cap. Regarding NOx, I don't know. I mean, the new Tier 3 engines consume more fuel, so there again, you would see a connection for the impact of NOx regulations on CO2.
That's okay. Edmund, your thoughts on any lessons to be learned, what we've learned out of this experience?
Well, I tend to agree about the fact that the impacts from IMO 2020 haven't necessarily fully resonated yet because of the COVID pandemic, and we'll see that as hopefully we continue to recover from the pandemic. Although of course it's still very much up in the air at the moment. For me, I mean, my understanding and where I see a connection is that some of the measures that may be adopted, the technical measures that may be adopted for achieving EEXI reduction may have implications for the technical file, in particular the NOx technical file, and so there has to be some care taken. And I know this is something that the classification societies are very aware of, that some care has to be taken when you're changing some of the measures. You're not then having an impact on some of the other controls that you're seeking to achieve on your vessel, particularly if you're already NOx Tier 3 certified. So I just think that these are some of the, again, it's a case of understanding the overall picture as much as the individual provision. Thank you.
Okay, Panos, to this.
Yeah, we consider that it was a successful transition from the high sulfur fuel to the low. So the amazing thing is that we choose different paths to comply. I mean, the compliant fuel or fitting scrubbers. And it seems that both are happy actually with the results. Recently, I heard that even those who decided to install scrubbers are not so pessimistic, and even if they had not the good market they were expecting, they are still hoping that they will have payback even longer, within 5 years or 6 years, but they will have a payback. So I will say that finally it was a smooth, technically a smooth transition. I don't know how it will be because we are only in the first year, whether we will have any major development in the near future, actually, in terms of the price, especially of the fuel.
Okay, John, your thoughts?
I agree with the previous colleagues. Allow me to talk a little bit more about the NOx compliance. In general, we observe a reluctance of some shipyards to offer Tier 3 compliant designs because of space problems, because we have to apply the abatement equipment in also the auxiliary engines, and we have a footprint problem. We have problems with NOx in even alternative fuels, like biofuels. Methanol is easy to comply because it can be emulsified with water, and some people are willing to take out the NECAS area from their trading scheme to save some money.
I mean, you mean take out areas such as the North
America and North Europe. Yes, yes.
It's interesting because you exclude a substantial part of the world. I mean,
nevertheless, because you need to have a substantial additional investment in abatement equipment, some people do not choose to have Tier 3 compliance.
But what about the future? I mean, at some point, these vessels will need to be sold. I mean, what's going to happen? What will happen then?
They will be saddled with constraints in their trading area.
Interesting. I mean, I never heard of that. I mean, I think it's a dead end, but I mean, that's my opinion. I mean, maybe some of you agree, maybe some of you disagree, but it seems like a dead end.
I have a case, Apostole, where a shipyard refused to sign a contract for a large order with Tier 3 compliant vessels. Said we can offer only Tier 2.
Yeah, but at that case, I assume that the owner went to another yard to get a NOx Tier 3 ship.
Your assumption is correct.
So, I mean, he didn't stay over there and say, that's okay, I'll stick with the NOx Tier 2. Anyway, Panos Harilaos, your thoughts?
On this last issue, you have to remember that there are many Asian owners that they plan to operate their ships in Asia. Yeah. So it's not unheard of. Anyways, as far as the transition, we didn't see any big damages that we're afraid of, but I've been hearing, and we have seen it in some of our ships, about a very much increased wear of the cylinder liners using the very low sulfur fuel oil. Right now, if you want to order a spare cylinder liner from B&W for a supramature Panamax, the waiting time is more than 5 months. So that's an issue. It might have to do with wrong instructions that the lube oil suppliers gave as to how much and what type of lube oil should be used with a very low sulfur fuel oil. But it's still under investigation. The fact is that we have excessive wear, and I'm talking about a liner being worn in months instead of 10 years. That's the normal time. Okay, as far as NOx, a funny thing that I see, for example, has to do with the engines that burn LNG, and they try to reduce the methane slip. Once you try to reduce the methane slip, you exceed the NOx limit. So there is a trade-off over there. So that's why the latest engine, the high pressure engine that B&W came up with, didn't very low methane slip, but didn't comply with NOx tier 3, so no owner wanted it. So they reverted back to the high methane slip engines.
Yeah, I would like to ask both Panos Zachariadis and Panos Koukoudis of what Panos Koukoudis commented earlier on about the bet that was placed by a number of owners in the market trying to install scrubbers, especially the open loops, after the ban, and they had the market in front of them with a huge price differential. Now, this price differential after the first quarter of 2020 was elapsed, was eliminated, and I would like to ask you if you think that this bet has been actually gained these people some money. Is it benefited these owners, or was it a disadvantage? Panos, you said, Panos Koukoudis, you said earlier on, they will have to wait for a number of years to get their money back for repayment. Do you think that this gamble actually made sense for them?
Look, it was a decision that actually we took exactly the opposite path. We thought that it is very risky to invest in scrubbers, waiting for a market and a big difference in terms of price. But what is surprising is that still some owners are installing scrubbers, not in new buildings, but in existing ships. Probably are orders that they have placed before, so they have the scrubbers and they have to install it. Or there are reports, or they're still expecting, that the price difference between the two fuels will be higher in the future, maybe in 2 years or 3 years. The regulations are also something that are to be considered, because today we have some areas, especially inside ports, that you do not operate scrubbers. And the tendency is to increase these areas and probably also to have problems with authorities in some ports. Yeah. But that's, I think that was a commercial decision more than a technical.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was a commercial decision. Panos Zachariadis, your thoughts on the gamble, taken by some owners?
It depends on the ship type. For some ship types, it's not a gamble at all, and it's appropriate. For example, big ones, Cape-size bulk carriers on fixed schedules, VLCCs, you're going to load in the Persian Gulf and you will discharge in Japan, back and forth. So why not fit a scrubber? But for medium or small type bulk carriers in Trump trade, I would call that a gamble, because in most places you cannot find the heavy fuel oil in those small ports that those ships go. So,
yeah, agree. Now I would like to, let's say, focus on the EEXI and the CII, and I would like to listen from all of you of how much of a burden you think it will be for the market. Let's say, not ranging from 1 to 10, but let's say compared to the IMO 2020. I can recall 18 months ago, we were thinking that IMO 2020 would be a huge problem for the market. Now, I would like to ask you, how much of a burden do you think it will be, this compliance with the EEXI and the CII? Harilaos.
I don't know. Both of them look to me unnecessarily complex. And I'm of the philosophy that one should try to look at, simple solutions to this problem rather than going into ever increasing complexity. And of course, it remains to be seen what the impact is going to be. But my impression is that it's both of these, the combined measure is going to add to the complexity, and we'll see. And when I say simple solution, in my opinion, the simple solution is to put a tax on fuel, because if you don't, then people are going to use fossil fuels. But it's simple on the one hand, difficult on the other, because there's a lot of political opposition to it.
Absolutely. But I would like not a comment, but I would like just as a counter argument, we said more or less, the industry said more or less the same thing when EEDI was introduced, that it will, produce problems and so on and so forth. Edmund, your thoughts?
Well, I'm afraid to say, I just think, thinking about what might be or why, we have to deal with what's in front of us, and what is in front of us are amendments that have been approved by MEPC 75 and are very likely to be adopted by 76. And I think what the lesson and why I did my presentation earlier was really to say that was about 5 years work of preparation. So we're not necessarily going to have the luxury of that time to get ready for the implementation of EEXI and CII, but I know that this is why there needs to be, hopefully we'll get back to IMO and we can get a lot of discussion and debate and deliberation of the provisions to make sure that the issues and the risks that are going to arise can be appropriately and effectively discussed, and any measures or methods or approaches to address those can be brought forward. As I said, I think we have to recognise that the initial strategy that was adopted in 2018 really set in place a clear message of intent from the governments of the world about where the shipping industry should be going. And 2050 is just an interim. For me, 2050 is an interim state. It's not, the vision in the strategy talks about decarbonisation of the sector by the end of the century. So I think you have to understand that these short-term measures, which is what they are exactly that, and they are focused on 2030. But the bigger game is really the 2050, followed by the end of the century.
Yeah. Panos Koukoudis, your takes on this?
Look, depends on the way you are looking at the regulations, actually. If you are looking at the regulation from the prospect of the ship owner, or from the prospect of charterer, or from banks, or we're going to have a different view of the regulation. So EEXI is a regulation that is not nice for the owners, because it's the only one that has to pay, and still even the supporters, they don't know what will be the EEXI for 2026 and what will be the EEXI for 2030. And what kind of ships we have to build today, and how many years we have to consider for our ships. If we talk with charters, probably they will love it, or if you have your cargo, you will love it. You have to spend nothing. It's only ship owners matter. CII is something that probably is exactly the opposite. The charters do not like CII. This will have an impact in their business, in their cost, in the transportation of the goods. For owners, I think it's just a matter that it's a regulation for the operator. It's not a regulation for the owner. We have a limit on the fuel, so the transportation work will be a little bit longer. That will be beneficial for the owners. But of course, depends on what point of view you have, then you have also your position.
Okay. John Kokarakis, your thoughts?
Regarding the EEXI, first of all, I would like to recommend that we stay cool until MEPC 76 concludes and see the final regulations. In my opinion, EEXI is a storm in a teacup. It's not going to have any critical impact, less than 1% CO2 reduction. We're going to see a mandated power limit instead of a speed limit. Practically, it's a power limit. CII is a different story with a rating of the ships. But once again, I would like to say that we still do not know if there are going to be any punishment for the people that do not achieve, do not go away from D and E rating. IMO has said nothing so far, and we don't know. So far, so good. CII is a measure aiming to reduce CO2, and until we find out the punitive measures, we cannot say anything. Okay. But it's more critical than EEXI, of course.
Yeah. Panos Zachariadis?
Yeah, I also think EEXI is simple, and it's not supposed to be dropping as time passes. It's supposed to be comply with the EEDI phase 2, put a limiter on the engine, and that's it. So to me, it's simple. CII, I think, is going to be a big headache, not only for charterers, but for owners too. Except for the fact that you are going to have very efficient ships scoring E, okay, or you are going to have very bad ships scoring A. So it's going to be a mix. And 1 year, the same ship may be A, and the next year may be E. So what kind of counter proposals measures can you have? One problem is, even if you have total control of your ship, without the charterer, you still do not have control of the CII. That's headache number one. Headache number two is, if you charter your ship in the beginning of the year, all the charterers want to go full speed. You now have room, okay? So go full speed, okay. Then at some point you have to calculate, when should I say to the charterer, sorry, I cannot go full speed anymore. You can't do that. The charterer is going to be insisting. You don't know where you stand because you didn't do all the math, and even you'll never know what the past charterer's effect was until the year closes and you find out what your rating is. Too late to go after the charter. It's going to be a huge headache, I think.
Yeah. Now, next item on the agenda, IMO, let's say, plan towards 2050. As correctly Edmund pointed out, our target is to minimize 50% the emissions compared to the 2008 base. However, the EU has more or less, I'm not saying diverging, but they're not converging the objectives they have. They're talking about onshore power within 2030, and they're talking about a carbon neutral continent by 2050. Carbon neutral, of course, does not necessarily mean zero emissions. It means carbon they have to offset. But again, I would like to ask and hear each one of you talking on how we could, let's say, proactively try to cooperate with these guys. How can the industry, let's say, minimize the impact of what seems to be on a collision course between the IMO work and the EU work? Harilaos.
Well, I mean, I had the parallel of an elephant. I find it incredible that these two things, the IMO process and the EU process, which are supposedly dealing with the same subject, how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, they don't intersect at all. I mean, even though many of the same people participate in both. So, I mean, anybody has examined the impact of the inclusion of EU ETS on the short-term measure? No. The other way around? No. There should be some discussion, and I think that the EU should listen to the industry, because I think that of course we don't know what the EU ETS is going to be, but there are a lot of indications that it will create a lot of distortion. And I mean, we have done a study that shows that even the CO2 that is supposed to reduce, it's not going to be that much. So I think the members of the parliament and the commission should be willing to listen to the industry and to the IMO, because I think it would be bad if you have a regional measure and then China is going to have the same thing and the United States is going to have so you have all kinds of interconnected regional approaches. It's going to be a big mess. I think there should be a global approach. On the other hand, of course, the IMO should go faster. should take the opportunity to move on MBMs because you need MBMs, but you need the right kind of MBMs, not the wrong kind of MBMs.
Yeah, but even within shipping, just a thought, let's say, to our discussion. Even within our industry, we've seen opposite opinions talking about a possible MBM. We've heard from Intercargo something in the range of $2 per ton as a levy. And from the other side, we hear from Marshall Islands $100 per ton.
Yeah,
so within these 200 and 100, there's a huge gap even within our industry. Harilaos, yes.
Yeah. So this $2 is not an MBM, even by its proposers. I mean, they don't call it an MBM. It is a mechanism to raise money for R&D.
Right.
On the other hand, they have said that should the IMO want to go towards a levy, they can use the architecture of this scheme to move on that front. Now, the Marshall Islands proposed the $100 per ton of CO2, which is, you multiply this by 3, about $300. I think it's a reasonable proposal. On the other hand, I'm not really very optimistic because there's a lot of opposition. I mean, for the $2, you have countries saying, the $2, well, we want to have an impact assessment of the $2 on our economies. And they did. I mean, they commissioned Clarksons to do that. Yeah. $2 is well below the noise of any of daily fuel fluctuations. Right. So imagine if somebody comes with the $300, what's going to happen?
Absolutely. Just let's say to add some fuel to our discussion. Edmund, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually slightly more complicated as well, and I wasn't aware of until recently that this sort of came out last year in the height of the pandemic. That the EU have proposed, or the EEC, the European Commission, I understand from DG Move, have proposed a Fuel EU Maritime initiative, and this is another initiative to support the Green Deal, whereby they're looking at the how to sort of encourage the uptake of alternative fuels in the European Union, and at the moment the way it's being proposed is that, and the concern I know of ship owners is that it'll be an obligation on the ship to find these alternative fuels, and there'll be no obligation on the suppliers, which of course it would be seen as slightly sort of illogical, because how then can ships guarantee compliance? Then there may be, of course, another compliance mechanism. We don't know what that is, and we don't know. And again, so it is a complicated picture. And I think without going into sort of, let's not sort of say here bashing policymakers because they have instructions from up high, from their leaders to come up with these policies. I think the difficulty is what it shows and what it clearly demonstrates, both at IMO and within the EU and other bodies, policy-making bodies, is that there is a demand and there's for increased action. And everyone here on this call knows that there's increasing pressure from wider society for action to be taken to address climate change. And increasingly, it's not going to be acceptable to say, well, we can't do anything, or we can't do this. We have to do something, and we have to demonstrate. And I commend those the industry leaders who've taken, for example, on the fund, the R&D fund. I mean, to propose $2 and then for people to turn around and complain and say, I mean, quite rightly, it's within the noise of a fuel price, a daily fuel price. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be something. R&D is critical for how we're going to address climate change in the industry as a global sector, because large flag states don't necessarily have the resources, the financial resources, to be able to do this on their own. So we do have to do it as a collective. So how do we resolve that? So I think that there are some issues, but I'll be honest with you, I can't see it getting any less complex, because I think there is demand from various corners for action to be taken sooner rather than later.
Okay, Panos Koukoudis, your thoughts on this?
Yeah. Actually, I agree with Professor Psaraftis. The issue is mainly political. There is a lot of pressure, but we have a great difficulty dealing with different regulations in different areas of the world. We have, they say that the cost for decarbonization will be something like 2.8 trillion, something like that. Is it reasonable to expect that all these costs will not attract some opportunistic approaches? So especially if we are talking about regulations that they're going to have a huge financial impact, we have to be careful to see also the results, the environmental results. And I think ETS is one of the measures that we have very little information, very few things we know about the environmental results. We know very well what is the financial impact, but not what will be finally the benefit for the environment. The tax on fuel could be a very good solution, but as Professor Psaraftis said, that we're going to have a strong reaction from especially charterers who are going to pay for the fuel and for the cargo and for areas that are in remote locations. So this is also something that we have to forget. But definitely we have to take actions because there is a lot of pressure, and at least we have to take actions to have also a kind of environmental benefit if not.
Yeah. And I have to admit from what you said, the actual, let's say, more or less estimated price of the global fleet is in the range, the estimated value of $1 trillion US. So, and I've heard these rumors, as you said, of 2.83 trillion, 2.5 trillion. So it's a huge amount of money, and it's more.
Yes, but you have to consider that actually what the Japanese, they didn't write now in the EEXI, but they wrote that because they had the proposal for 10 years. What they aim is actually to have the lifetime of the ship to be reduced to 15 or to 10 years. They consider that within 10 years, we have already made our profit, and then the ship has to be replaced. So you have to think the whole picture. And then if you see how banks, for instance, financial institutions are interested on environmental regulations, you realize that there are other incentives too.
Yeah, correct. Change is coming, correct. John Kokarakis, your thoughts?
We see the problems of regionalization of the regulations already with a conflict between MRV and DCS, where people are doing the same type of work 2 times, even in a different way. And we talk about, so we do not agree with this ETS scheme because we might see a vessel going to a European port, visiting a non-European port prior to it, and limit the carbon spent in a European voyage. We talk about carbon neutrality and alternative fuels when the technology to apply this is not mature. It would be preferable to have a fund. Maybe that fund would help to reduce the cost of decarbonization in order to be spent on research and make the technology more adapted to reality.
And that was the idea of the intercargo proposal. I mean, that was the main principle, to create a fund.
Exactly, and it appears to be a correct proposal. By the way, this proposal of $300 per ton has been already out by Trafigura. Trafigura proposed $300 per ton of carbon.
Yeah. And Panos Zachariadis, your thoughts?
Okay, well, I think if the EU proceeds with a real ETS, regional ETS, they're going to be shooting themselves in the foot. That's what I think. But they may proceed with a not real ETS, like a hybrid ETS. You have to realize that European law allows within the ETS framework to just have a flat tax, for example. So that's a possibility. Applying only to intra-European voyages might be a possibility, so we don't know what it's going to be. But I cannot think of anything simpler than what the Professor Psaraftis said about the flat levy. A high levy, okay, not the $2, would be the ideal thing for new fuels to take off, alternative fuel development and all that, because you are going to make the current fuels more expensive. But that should have been done before. Now that we have EEDI, EEXI, CII, and this and that, and the other thing, having an MBM on top of that may be too much. Edmund wants to say
Edmund,
something.
yes.
Yeah, sorry. Whilst I can certainly sympathise and empathise with the point of view. I think it's got to be remembered that a lot of the energy efficiency work, the measures, you know, what they'll do is actually decrease or reduce the margin between the use of hydrocarbon fuels and these alternative fuels because of energy efficiency measures. I know that it's limited in some respects, but the whole point of this is it will enable a sort of a narrowing, if you like, of the differences between them. Because if you're obviously making the ship more energy efficient, you're having to use less fuel, and therefore you're going to have to use less of these alternative fuels. So in a way, it's providing a way forward. But I agree. I mean, there are still some big steps to be made to achieve some of the outcomes we're looking for. Thank you.
Yes.
That would be good, assuming those were really energy efficiency measures. That's the problem. I mean, when EEDI was first being developed, Greece said, you know, it's so easy. You're going to have a smaller engine, and you're going to comply with whatever EEDI. Take this portion out, and we gave them the solution. So designers are forced to make the ships more hydrodynamically efficient. No, was the answer. So
I would like, as we have to wrap up the panel because we will be out of time, I would like to ask you, I'll give you 30 seconds. I would like to ask you to take your crystal ball and make your, let's say, something like a wish list. What you would like as a wish list within, let's say, 30, 40 seconds to move the decarbonization agenda forward for our industry. Harilaos.
Well, I mean, I've always said that perhaps the only solution, and maybe this is a kind of hawkish position that I have, the only solution is to have the polluter pay for their greenhouse gas emissions. So internalize the external cost of greenhouse gas emissions. So I think the only solution is to put a tax on fossil fuels. If you don't do that, the people are going to continue using fossil fuels, and all these alternative fuels are not going to happen by themselves.
Okay, Edmund?
Yes, I do agree. I think ultimately there's going to have to be a carbon price applied to narrow that gap. But I think the market is actually already demonstrating its willingness to accept that. You're seeing with the Sea Cargo Charter, for example, and the like, and also even the financiers, the bankers are getting involved in terms of where their investment is, and that will drive the change as much as any direct carbon price.
Okay, Panos Kourkoudis?
Yeah, definitely. If we see the table and actually the results of the studies, not only that study that I show you in my presentation, and if we are focused on the results of environmental measure, then I think we're going to have the solution. And the solution presently is only to have operational measures and to have market-based measures like the levy on fuel. So I hope that actually we will be focused on the results, and we will stop making opportunistic approach, and we try to postpone the decision, to take proper decision actually, because the environment is for the benefit of all of us.
Okay, John Kokarakis?
Technology leaps forward with great jumps. So what I would like to see is some effort spent on technologies like carbon capture, which may be the answer to our problems, and also increased use of renewable sources of energy like wind, solar, and hydropower, because that is practically an inexhaustible source of energy.
Okay, and Panos Zachariadis?
Well, I would like to see the misinformation on many issues go away. Like, for example, alternative fuels, not only from vested interests, sometimes from classes too. Let's agree LNG doesn't produce 25% less CO2 emissions. Hydrogen is not all the same. There is black hydrogen and there is green hydrogen. So it's time to tell things as they are. Otherwise, we're going to find it ahead of us as an obstacle in the future.
Okay. Gentlemen, I would like to thank you very much for taking the time to join us in this panel. It's been an honor and a privilege to moderate this panel. I would like to thank you all, thank our viewers, and trust we see you in one of our future events. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.